WeInfuse Podcast, episode number 36. Welcome to the WeInfuse Podcast. My name is Dylan McCabe, and in every episode, we give you a seat at the table as we talk with infusion center owners and operators and industry experts so that you can get the insights you need to grow and streamline your own practice. Now, in this episode, I'm going to talk with Steve Watkins. He's the Executive Vice President of Zyno Solutions, and prior to being with Zyno, he has founded a couple of different healthcare companies and been the CEO at the helm of companies that have been acquired and done really well. So he brings a lot of seasoned experience as an executive, as an entrepreneur, and also as somebody who's an expert in the realm of infusion. Specifically, we're going to talk about with infusion pumps. So this episode is really going to be everything you need to know about infusion pumps to make an educated decision on whether or not you should incorporate infusion pumps in your practice, how to know the difference between different brands, and really just how to make an educated decision that I think could give you a great ROI, reduce stress, and streamline your processes for your nurses and your patients. All right, let's jump into this conversation with Steve from Zyno Solutions. All right. As I mentioned, we have special guest on the show today, Steve Watkins. He's the Executive Vice President and General Manager of Zyno Solutions. So, Steve, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. First time I've ever done a podcast. I've appeared in front of investors on Wall Street and TV, but never a podcast. So I'll stumble through it.
Oh, well, you're in good company. I've had a lot of people say that before we get into it. So it's really neat because we haven't really had a deep dive on pumps and infusion workflow as far as from that standpoint. So before we get into that and the different solutions that people can learn about, kind of give us a little bit of knowledge on your background and how you got into this industry.
Okay. Originally, I was a nuclear medicine technologist, promoted to chief tech, and then had gone into sales. So from that, I was actually the original founder of Infusion. We're the largest provider of oncolytical pumps in the country. We are also part of the PRN group, which was the largest supplier of oncolytical drugs way back then. Cardinal ended up purchasing PRN services. But Infusion grew. I was the founder and CEO for about 15 years. And then iFlow purchased us. iFlow was the maker of the OnQ, the elastomeric devices. So besides having pump experience, now I've got 10 years with iFlow as both an officer and president of the Infusion side. So I understand elastomerics, IV pumps, et cetera. And during that time, we also branched out. We opened up a pharmacy. So I was a principal in a pharmacy. We had biomed services. We also acquired a billing service for doctors and DMEs. So besides infusion, I've got biomed repair services, leasing company services, billing. So I've got a whole gamut of things like that. Anyway, actually retired for 9.5 years. And during that time, I did a lot of consulting for different companies. But one of the most rewarding was I did a consulting for a company that set up nursing agencies and home healthcare agencies across the country and hospices. We had a legal division, which I found very interesting. And that's when the government started doing all their ADRs, their RACs, their ZPICs, et cetera. So got that legal experience as well as just understanding how the Medicare and the government work as far as audits and what they're looking for and how they're finding companies and what the corrective actions were. So quite a bit of everything there. And then Medicare came along with their changes in the Medicare ruling for home infusion devices, specifically ambulatory pumps, with their what's called SC 1609, which says that now it's an incident to, it's not to be billed separate as a DME. So with Zyno, I had told the owner, I said, this is going to change your marketing. Are you familiar with it? And he had said no. So I explained it to him. So he asked me to present to his sales team, and I did. We went to the national sales meeting, presented to it. So he invited me back to Natick, which is just outside Boston, to show me what they were working on. And I kept seeing so many new innovative ideas that would help patients and nurses. It was very exciting, things that they were working on, as well as some existing products that they were enhancing. A lot of different directions. They had, at that time, I think over 80 engineers working on projects, which for R&D for a smaller company was phenomenal. For one of the major pump companies, they do the connectivity from the EMR to the from the drug dispensing machine to the pole mounted pump and back to the EMR, completing that whole cycle. And it was all new technology. Didn't realize they were the ones doing it. So a lot of exciting things. So they offered me a position and said, we want you to be the strategic thoughts behind what we're doing. So I accepted the job and said, I'll do it for a year. Just have fun. I've been retired, and it's been 3.5 years now, and I'm still here because a lot of new things in the works and a lot of things that they are working on. So, and their biggest background is LVPs, large volume pumps, and ambulatory pumps, as well as other devices that they are currently working on. So, quite a varied experience. It's been fun. It's been a great ride. I've seen the changes in Medicare rulings over 35 years as how it affects everybody, and got a chance to lobby in Washington as well as present in Washington, the Medicare committees, to see how they work. So got a very diverse background, but for our customers, that translates into understanding their pain points, how to solve the pain points. Gives me a lot of knowledge. When they start talking about audits, I can understand, or repair bills, I understand what goes into it, as well as, CapEx, costing the expense for these pumps and things like that. And how's it going to help them in their clinics and their day-to-day operations? So just summing it up, just a wide variety of backgrounds here. And as I said, it's been a fun ride. So anyway.
Yeah, that's a vast experience that you bring to the table there from as, founding more than one company, CEO. So you're bringing the perspective of an executive looking at costs and scalability. You're also bringing an engineering perspective, getting really deep on that side. And like you mentioned, the legal issues in the industry. And I think that's really neat that now you're in a position where you're just obviously operating in your experience and in your strengths from a strategy perspective for the decisions and the path for Zyno. And like you said, understanding those pain points, that's just really cool. So let's get into that. Let's talk about those pain points with somebody maybe just starting in an ambulatory infusion center or running an infusion practice, and maybe they've not used pumps and they want to consider using pumps. And here we go. Whether it's using pumps or buying a new air conditioner for your home, you go into research mode and you're presented with all these options. And if you're not seasoned like you are, it's really difficult to wade through the options and know the pros and cons. So how would you start with a new customer that says, look, we've got, 6 chairs. What we're doing now is fine, but we've had talks with a few people and they said we should consider pumps. What are those initial thoughts, or what's the process to work through from that standpoint?
Well, the first and biggest roadblock or hindrance is, they started up an infusion center and they've spent a lot of money doing that. Now we're coming along with infusion pumps that are a capital cost for them. So, they're a little bit hesitant at first, but what they don't realize is what pumps can do is increase your throughput. You can see more patients. And by that, I mean, let's say you're using a gravity or dial flow. The nurse goes over, sets up the dial flow, walks away, and she's taking care of another patient. Well, the therapy ends and the nurse is still taking care of another patient. She doesn't realize that therapy has ended, where the pump will alarm and say, therapy's over. And so you can pause what she's doing with that patient, walk over, do a quick DC, and get that patient on their way. 2 things happen here. Number 1, the nurse is more efficient with her time. But number 2, that patient started at 9, expected to be done at 10. They are done at 10. It just increases that throughput. We have a large group that has insisted on pumps, and they were going to do a white paper for us, but CV-19 hit us. The reason they do pumps is they can add 1 or 2 more patients per site per day, just because of the efficiency. What we've done is have for our pumps, and I'm not making a plug here, but we did a simple thing. We listened to what the nurses have, their big pain points. And one of them is if we have, let's say, 5 or 10 chairs and pumps are beeping, we don't know which pump is beeping. It's stretched out. So we got to go patient to patient to patient. So we have a little plug-in blue or red light, depending on your taste of colors, and it flashes. So it lets the nurse know that, hey, there's something with this pump, be it an occlusion or the patient's therapy has ended or whatnot. So simple things like that. But it increases the throughput, which increases the revenue, which increases patient satisfaction. as well as helping the nurses know. Nurses also, if we're doing something like a 10-step protocol, they're doing a dial flow, they've got to stop what they're doing because the patient's, first step is done, go over and change the parameters, come back, start, working with another patient. Oh, now I got to go back and change it again. Where the pumps, at least our pumps, we can do that. We can program a protocol in there that's a 10-step, and it automatically does that. So all the nurse has to do is just kind of make sure the patient's doing fine, a quick glance at them, or how's it going, Mr. Smith? So it allows that, as well as we can pre-program the pump to do certain protocols that they want. If they have a protocol they do quite often, they just go up, put the IV tubing through the pump, connect the patient, and then just basically dial in, let's just say it's ketamine or something like that. They have a standard formulary, the pump starts going, and they can go on and do some other work with some other patients, or they're charting and stuff like that. So pumps will increase the throughput, which allows nurses more time to get other things done, as well as get patient satisfaction. And your return on investment is that fact you can see an extra patient or two, and patients will repeat coming back. They're going to like that. They're on schedule, so they're not going to the bigger hospitals, et cetera. So those are how type of things we would discuss with the infusion manager, business practice, or the physician, whatever. But that's one of the biggest things. We can get into safety of the pumps. Occlusions happen, pumps will alarm for that. Where with gravity and dial flows and all that, you just never know those things are going on. So you run into some issues with clotting, which, you got to flush the line. Again, taking more time. So if you're not catching those things right up front, that patient requires more time. They're in the chair longer. You can't see the other patients. They get backed up because they're waiting for the next step of the therapy or to be DC'd, et cetera. So those are some of the, again, factors that we would discuss. So,
well, and it seems like another big bit. So you've got the benefit, you've got the pain point of a very cumbersome workflow for the infusion nurse having to address these different issues. Whereas with the pump, it's more streamlined and automated once you get the patient set up. But it seems like another pain point is you've got an infusion nurse if you've got high volume in those chairs and those chairs are turning over with patients, you have dramatically increased the complexity of the infusion nurse's workflow, because now the nurse is having to address different people at different stages of the process and having to, like you said, manually go address all these issues. Whereas with a pump, you're simplifying the process. And I think that's one of the main roles of anybody who leads any kind of business, whether it's an ambulatory infusion center or whatever business. One of your key functions as a leader is to simplify. You've got to simplify the process, because if that nurse's stress level increases, you're automatically going to get a reduction in patient care. You're going to get a poor patient experience if the nurse is running around like crazy. What about cost? Oh, go ahead.
I would say, and one of the things too, it's not just about the patient. If we can keep the patient on schedule, the nurse gets done at the end of the day. She's not having to stay after, do the charting because she didn't have a chance to do the charting. She gets to go home at 5:00 and enjoy some family life too. So having been a former clinician when I was in nuclear medicine and I was chief of cardiology medicine, I had to take the call, or, the patients are over there for an extra hour or two because we had some issues and we didn't get to them. So you'd believe instead of an 8-hour day, you're putting 9-10 hours in by the time you get home. It's very tough. So we consider the nurse in all of this. So anyway, I just wanted to say if it wasn't just the patient, pumps will take the nurses into account. So anyway, you were going to lead into another question.
Yeah. And so, and that's one of the things, we always discuss at WeInfuse is with the infusion nurse's note in our system, it makes the nurse's charting very specific, but also very fast and easy. And we get a lot of feedback from different infusion practices where the nurses are just singing our praises, saying you've reduced the amount of time we spend charting dramatically. There's even a large infusion practice in Birmingham, Alabama, that we took off about 2 hours a day at the end of the day for the infusion nurses, because the current process they had was so lengthy. And so it seems like you guys are really in line with that. You're making things easier, faster, and just more streamlined. So what about from a cost perspective? I know I've talked with one of your reps in Texas, and he gave some case studies on cost savings. But I think, like you said, some people think, oh, this is a capital expenditure, but really long term, you save costs, you reduce costs, you save them money. So let's talk about that. How does that work long term?
Well, long term, again, I'm familiar with the Zyno pumps, or most familiar, I should say, with the Zyno pumps. These are the Timexes of the industry. We've got some when they first started 15 years ago, they're still in the field. They just keep on pumping away. So it's not like you're going to have to replace these pumps in 3 to 5 years. They're just going to keep on going. You can amortize them over, for your cost, depending on your cost basis. But there's a point in time where, okay, they might need updating. Well, our pumps can be updated manually for these types. We have wireless ones also, but they can be updated with new software and changes during the preventive maintenance process. And the cost, you have leasing, you have rentals, you have just straight up purchasing of these pumps, and you can finance those purchases. So their cost really is, when you think of a pump that's going to last 10 or 15 years, really becomes quite minimal on it. And then we get into the supplies. Our supplies are very reasonably cost. And it depends on the complexity of what you're administering. Do you need a filter? Do you not need a filter? It's the same thing as that you would have with a gravity set. But you've got a pump that has a pumping chamber. So you do have to have elastic or a type of PVC that will fit in that, which costs a little bit more. But in the overall scheme of the cost of drugs, the cost of the overhead, nursing, administration, these are just slight, cost. I mean, it's almost like a rounding error per se. So the cost isn't that prohibitive to acquire a pump and use a pump compared to what they're doing out there. A dial flow costs some money. Even gravity, if you're using gravity, and I do see that a lot, has a cost associated with it. But with pump set, there's some technology behind it, but you basically have a IV bag, spike, part that goes in the pumping chamber, and distal end. Now, if you want to add, Y sites for injections and piggybacks and things like that, you're adding cost, but you'd have to add that same cost on any other type of set. So in the overall scheme, we're not really that much more expensive for an IV set. Now, some pumps, get a little bit fancier in the drip chambers, but the part that goes in the pumping chambers, and there is more cost. But that's one of the things we decided at Zyno, that we want to make this very affordable. We want a pump that lasts. The biggest, having the biomed side of it, again, we'll go into that, is our pumps have a metal door on it versus a plastic door, a metal handle. And that's always a breaking point on pumps. Pumps, when you lift up the plastic handle, open the door, just, hundreds of times in a month, they break. That's really the way it is. But we designed ours with metal handle, metal door. We don't put any electronics at all in the door whatsoever. So if the door breaks, which doesn't happen, but by some odd reason, there's no electrical or pump sensors, et cetera, built into that. So we don't have that extra repair cost involved in it. So again, we're the Timex, we're the workhorse of the industry, but these pumps will last and keep on working. Minimal upkeep, preventive maintenance for your protocols or for your institution there, and we're good to go. So I think I hope that answered your question.
No, that's great. I mean, you guys really, like you said, the workhorse of the industry. I'm a truck guy. I've had trucks for years, and Toyota is not paying me to say this, but I love my Toyota Tundra. I'm on my second one. My wife has had multiple Toyota 4Runners, and I had a friend call me a few weeks ago and say, "Hey, do you recommend a good mechanic nearby in the area we live in, Dallas?" And I said, "Well, I got to tell you, I've never been to a mechanic. In 10 years, I have not been to a mechanic a single time. All I've had to do is replace one battery, but we've had no issues with our vehicles. We do the scheduled maintenance, and that's what happens when you have a Toyota Tundra. I mean, it's just a bulletproof truck. And I feel like the Zyno pump, you guys have put some real thought and strategy into even the way the pump is designed, like you mentioned with the metal door. And I think another thing is the way that the pump is angled. So let's talk about that from a design standpoint. Yeah,
I mean, we designed our pumps with nurses' input and clinicians' input. Everybody says that. I mean, let's just face it. Everybody says, "Oh yeah, we did that." But we have what we call a minimum viable. So we make a pump or whatever, we have different things. Again, we go into different things that we manufacture. We take the pump, minimum viable, beta test it out there, take the input, bring it back and change it. So one of the things where, nurses have to drop down to see it, or it's too high up on the pole, too low on the pole, nurse is short, nurse is tall. By turning it at 45 degrees, it just makes it so much easier. That's just, it's like, wow, why didn't I think of that? And it's the same thing with the light that we have that signals there's an issue with the pump or end of infusion. They can see that. We have some huge clinics that are, almost like L-shaped, and they'll have 20, 30, 40 chairs. In fact, some of them, we have 90 chairs. They hear, pumps are beeping as they're being programmed. Pumps are beeping as there's occlusion. Pumps are beeping because they're ending. It's like, well, who's what, where? Where if they see the light flashing, they can zero in right on that pump real quick. It's just, again, simple things like, why didn't anybody else think of that? So we've done that same way with our pumps being kind of very, very intuitive. It was all due to nurses' input. So we really did listen. We did make changes. Again, starting out minimum viable, get the feedback, make the changes. Send it back out, get the feedback, and make the changes. So we've evolved with our pump over the years. But having said that, we have the pumps that are 10, 15 years old that have software updates, because, again, ours are upgradable that way. Nurses just love them the way they are. Said, no, we're fine. We're just going to stay with these. So the pumps have evolved, but we still see a lot of the very first original ones that are out there. But we owe a lot of it to the clinicians and business practice people that are out there. They gave us the input. They showed us what they needed, and we responded accordingly. So it's a partnership. I mean, that's how you develop the relationship, how you make changes, and everybody's happy. We're making a great product. They're happy. They're seeing what they wanted to see in the product. Works out well for all parties involved. So.
Absolutely. And that's the way, changes got brought about in WeInfuse over the last couple of years as well. You hear the same things that your customers want over and over again. And it's like, okay, let's push this to the top of the list for the software development team. And when you do that, for you guys with Zyno Solutions, when you do that, you really do start to set yourself apart from the competition in unique ways. And you guys have clearly done that. So let's address another thing that we hear often at WeInfuse is the infusion nurses. Maybe they've been an infusion nurse for 10, 15, 20 years. They have done something a specific way and it works, and it's not a pump. All right. So the infusion, whether it's the practice manager or the owner of the infusion center, they're thinking, I've got some solid infusion nurses. They know what they're doing. Now I'm going to come in and say, we're about to change the way you do things. So how do you, and I know you guys hear that as well, how do you address that, that source of stress to come in and say, hey, look, it's actually not that complicated. Here's our training process and what have you?
Yeah, well, again, some of the input, our pumps are very intuitive. We put in at one large institution over 3,000 pumps. We did not even have a rep go in. They just picked it up immediately themselves. We sent them DVDs and that, but it was so intuitive. They said, there's nothing to that. So, if you're going to a nurse that's had that, first off, again, because they don't have that structured pump throughput, they're running behind, they're tired at the end of the day. They don't want to say, oh God, something else I need to learn. So what we do is we'll come in, do a demo, and we'll let them have a pump for a day and see how easy it is. And, we'll work with them side by side. And once they see how easy it is and how it really helps them through the day and they're charting everything, pretty much sells itself. That's what we have found. It's not an intrusion. It's just having the nurse having the time to actually sit down with us, because without a pump in the institution, they are just running ragged. So, just simple demo, let them play with it, let them have it. Let them try it for a day or two and, see the results. I think most nurses are very glad to see what's progressing out there. So
I think so too, especially when you can see and get that demo in person and see how it can really just save you time, make your job easier, and make it easier for you to administer great patient care. Who wouldn't want that? And obviously there's a clear ROI from a cost standpoint long term. And you guys have a solid piece of equipment. And so what would you say are one of the things that you guys address that maybe I haven't asked about or you haven't mentioned from a decision standpoint that you would want to add to this, that, a pain point or maybe a hesitation that a potential customer may have?
Well, everybody's, the nursing society recommends pumps, free flow devices, etc. Our original pumps never had free flow protection in it. Then nursing society, I think it was the ONS society, came along and said, we need free flow protection. So we've added that into our devices. It really, I guess the pain points really are, it depends on, again, I'm sorry, I don't mean to kind of backtrack a little bit, but if it's an oncology unit with drug dispensing unit, depending which ones they have, they're trying to do stop and start times, chart all that. I see when I go to a place that doesn't have integration, I see sticky notes everywhere where they're trying to put the start and stop times in down, where we've developed a wireless system that will, again, go from the drug dispensing machine, tells the pump what's there. You have to choose it. We don't pre-program the pump. And then when the start and stop times are fed automatically to the EMR system. So those type of things make it so much larger. It's not economical for a small, 5-7 chair place, but 7-chair clinic. But when you start getting 20, 30 pumps, it becomes very economical. And that was always a pain point. When you start getting that many patients, trying to chart all the stop and start times and who's starting it and who's stopping it, or if there's an interruption from an anaphylactic reaction or something, trying to keep track of all that. So we actually do track that. But again, it depends on, we're only integrated with several different EMR systems at this point in time. And we keep adding them as we go along. It's just, we try to make life easier for the nurse. And that's the whole thing behind it. So as we get more and more data out there, and we have over, 40-some thousand pumps out there right now. So I think we've got most of the input, but we're always open to changing things. We just changed something for a major oncology center down south because they said, we would like to see X. So we did X because the pumps are programmable through software, things like that. I think that pretty much would answer the question. So.
No, that's good. And so, yeah, with 40,000 pumps, I'm sure you get plenty of feedback and you hear the same things over and over again. And so with your experience in the industry and the roles that you've had in different organizations, what's the best advice you can give to somebody that it has, they've got their infusion practice, they're trying to grow it, maybe they've even started some pumps, just I'd like to get your advice from a business perspective and also just your advice as far as just having a great culture and even a clinical perspective on using pumps and growing the business. But first, just with what you've experienced, what's the best advice you could give to somebody that's maybe they've only been doing this for a year or two and they really want to do this well long term?
Well, one of the things I saw very predominantly back when infusion clinics had been open for a while, and this goes back to my billing experience, we would see that there were a lot of billing errors due to the changeover or changing regulations and that. So you need a billing expert to kind of look at what you're billing and how you're billing, because let's face it, it's revenue is what's keeping you open. We had a physician, an infectious disease physician, who said, my billers are great. And they were very conscientious people. But we found, I forget the drug, I want to say it wasn't ampicillin, but something along those lines, where they were billing for 1 gram for every infusion, and patients were receiving 3 and 4 grams. So they were losing out 3 or 4, 75, 100% of revenue because they were not billing it correctly. So once we pointed that out, he had us look further and further into it. And we found a lot of those type of errors. It's just the way the previous person had set it up, and that's the way the following people had done. So you have to keep that revenue flowing, and part of keeping the revenue flowing is your billing. So from the business point of view, that's one of the major things. Number 2 is the culture. You want happy, friendly nurses. And again, back to the thing of getting them home on time so they have a great working environment. Patients like to know they're going to come in at 9 o'clock and get started at 9:30. They're done by 10:30 and they're on their way. So again, that's where pumps come in. It creates a happy environment. I hate to say it this way. My wife's always saying happy wife, happy life. Happy patients, happy nurses. Just makes it easy. Let's face it, nurses are in there to take care of patients. They want to see happy patients. They want to see results. And, our pumps help provide that type of environment for them.
How can people get in touch with you? I mean, obviously there's a lot that Zyno Solutions offers, and you guys have such a great reputation in the marketplace, which is why we've kind of partnered with you strategically at WeInfuse. what's the best thing people can do to connect with you guys?
Well, I think the best thing is, because they're part of the WeInfuse family, is to just get a hold of WeInfuse. You just ask, hey, we're interested in pumps. WeInfuse calls me up directly and says, hey, can you take care of these people? So I find where they're located, I assign it to a rep, and then that rep takes care of them. So, I mean, we have a website, ZynoSolutions.com, and that's a nice thing. But, to get the actual personal feel, touching feeling is, just go through WeInfuse. Reese and Brian send me an email, and then we get the ball rolling and put the rep in contact. It just seems a very good system. Works very well for everybody. Plus, it gives WeInfuse a chance to talk to them and say, hey, here's our collaboration. Here's what we recommend. I'm going to put you in touch with Zyno Solutions. And then it goes directly to me, and I take it to the rep. And I always let the person that's contacting me know, hey, here's the contact information for the rep, but I'm including them on our emails. And it's a system that seems to have been work, and I haven't had any complaints about it whatsoever. So it starts with WeInfuse. They're a great organization, and they care for their customers.
That's good. Well, Steve Watkins, Executive VP with Zyno Solutions, thank you so much for being on the show. All right. Great interview with Steve Watkins. I love what he said when he talked about just really making the nurse's life better and consequently the patient's life better, and really just reducing the number of steps in the process through using pumps. And I really like what he highlighted about the differences in pumps, everything from the metal door to the light on top to the 45-degree angle. So I hope you guys got a lot out of it. If you did, if you want to learn more, you can reach out to somebody at WeInfuse to learn more about kind of the whole ecosystem we have for you if you run an infusion practice. And if you haven't done so already, you owe it to yourself to test drive our WeInfuse software. It is the absolute best software solution for the infusion center, and we host webinars called Test Drive Tuesdays, and you can also just reach out to one of our account executives and just do a demo of the software. You will be blown away by how the software can save you time, save you money, and simplify a very cumbersome workflow and make it manageable and get a grip on that practice the way you want to. All right, guys, this is Dylan McCabe with the WeInfuse podcast, and I will catch you in the next episode.